All right, good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
It was 50 years ago today that Richard Nixon said, "Goodbye." And I knew Nixon. I knew Nixon starting in 1985 when he settled the dispute between the Major League Baseball owners and the Major League Baseball umpires, and he gave the umpires a 40% raise. I actually studied him. I'll tell you more stories in a minute about Nixon. But there is Richard Nixon and there's Gerald Ford, and we had two presidents in one day, 50 years ago today on August 9th. Like I said, I was in Toronto. Somebody said they were in Disney World when they heard the news. Anybody else remember where you were when you heard the news? Where were you?
In Israel.
You were in Israel. Did they care in Israel about Nixon? Nixon gave aid to the Israelis in 1973, Nixon. Yeah, he got involved. It took him a week, but he got involved. And that was strategic that it took him a week because he didn't want to get the Egyptians that upset. Anybody else remember where they were 50 years ago today?
What date was it?
August 9th, 1974.
I remember one thing.
In the swimming pool.
Swimming pool. Yeah.
I was right in New York.
No, you say
I
so.
was talking to some people in Israel about the Watergate thing and explained it to them. And their reaction was, is that all he did?
Is that all I did? Well, there's more. There was a whole bunch of crooked lawyers, a lot of crooked lawyers and he was one of them. You know, he finished third in his law class at Duke University, Richard Nixon, but there were a whole bunch of others. There are other things that went on as well. Some of you might remember Patty Hearst. And her kidnapping, and you watched it on TV. So Patty Hearst was one of those things that was going on. How many of you remember you couldn't get gas?
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't get gas. Probably none of you remember this, but the first ever barcode on a product where you could zip right through the supermarket was Wrigley chewing gum, which my periodontist who's down the street here appreciates because I had too much chewing gum. Haile Selassie is thrown out of Ethiopia, and with that 704 years of his family running the country, gone. Willy Brandt is in, and as the Chancellor of West Germany, and also the Portugal Revolution. A lot of stuff going on that year, but we're going to concentrate on this guy. Now, in 1972, Richard Nixon is going to run for re-election, and I don't know how appropriate or not appropriate this is, but his re-election committee was called the Committee for the Re-election of the President, better known as CREEP. CREEP, which I think describes Nixon in a lot of ways. Now, let me say this about that. I never had a problem with Richard Nixon. I dealt with him about 15, 20 times. And one day he said, I see him and I say, well, good afternoon, Mr. President. He says, no, Evan, call me Dick. Ever since then, he's Dick Nixon to me. Dick Nixon. But this is his re-election committee, the Committee for the Re-election of the President. Now let me tell you how I got to know Nixon. It's 1985, and I'm sitting at home one day, I'm going to a baseball game or something at night, and all of a sudden I get this telephone call from Gene Orza. He is the Assistant Executive Director of the Major League Baseball Players Association, and he says to me, what are you doing today? I said, nothing now. He said, how'd you like to go hang out with Dick Nixon this afternoon? I said, Dick Nixon, get out of here. I said, why would I hang out with Dick Nixon? He says, well, he's going to be the arbitrator of the baseball umpires dispute with the owners. Now, here's how that all worked out. There was a guy by the name of Richie Phillips. Richie Phillips was the head of the Baseball Umpires Association, and he's at loggerheads with Peter Ueberroth, who's the Major League Baseball commissioner, in the negotiations. And he says to Ueberroth, he says, well, what do you think? He said, what do you mean what I think? I think we should have arbitration. And he said, yeah, who do you got in mind? He said, Dick Nixon. He said, Dick Nixon? How do you know him? He's next door. He's next door. Yeah, he's babysitting his grandkids. Can you imagine Richard Nixon as a grandfather? Let me make this perfectly clear. If you don't clean those toys right now, you're going to spend time with Henry Kissinger. So he's next door. So your brother says, yeah. So we go down, and we're there. We go down. I'm down there. I believe Bruce Morton from ABC is there because I told him to come down, and Orza is there, and Don Thier is there from the Baseball Players Association. He's the executive director. And to do this properly, we all get there, and the secretary says, well, Mr. Nixon is out. He's out for lunch, but go to his office. And we all go to his office, and we go in there, and it's like, we're in the Oval Office. We really are. Look, there's the desk. And there are all the pictures around. The place was a miniature Oval Office, and all the pictures are there, him and Sadat, him and Khrushchev, him and this guy, him and that guy, and there are a whole bunch of flags all over the place as well. Yes?
You say 1985, so
This is 1985. No,
he's not president.
No, he's not president anymore. This is when he comes back to proper society. So we're sitting there, and we're in the office, and we're all looking at that chair behind the desk. And we're all looking, and it's too bad this was not around in those days, the cell phone. Because we all went behind the desk, and we did the same thing. I am not a crook. I am not a crook. Anyway, so that's how I got to meet Nixon, and that's how I got to know him a little bit. He lived in Park Ridge, New Jersey. In fact, I gave this talk the other day somewhere in New Jersey, and the guy said, I used to see him at the barbershop all the time. He was real friendly, and he never had Secret Service around him. Never had Secret Service protection. They turned it down. Well, But anyway, so here he is.
Evan,
Yeah.
how was he first as a person?
Stiff.
Different.
Stiff. Awkward. Which amazes me that he won 2 presidential elections because he was stiff and he was awkward. That's the way he was. But anyway, here he is. So it's the committee to re-elect the president. It's 1971 and 1972, and I'll take you back to that time. The Vietnam War continued. Any protesters of the Vietnam War here?
Yes.
Yes. Where'd you protest?
What?
Where'd you protest?
All over New York City.
All over New York City. Any Vietnam vets here? No. Okay, the American economy was in a mess. In the 1970 midterms, the Democrats won the popular vote in House races by 8.7%, adding a dozen seats. In 1971, Nixon's approval ratings were underwater, below 50%. Now, I am going to explain this photograph to you right now. Does that autograph look kind of strange? It's Nixon's autograph. Does it look a bit strange? Because it is. Let's see, what could well, I don't have anything here. I gave him an index card. And he puts the index card against a desk that he's in front of. And he starts signing it, but takes out a ruler out of his pocket, puts the index card down, lines the index card with the bottom of the table along with the ruler, and then starts writing on top of the ruler. So this is straight. This is absolutely straight. The only thing, he takes the ruler away and just crosses the X. He took out a ruler, measured his name on an index card. That's what he did. I thought that was rather odd or rather bizarre. But what's even odder here was when the Watergate break-in took place in 1972, in June 23rd, 1972. I was 16 years old. I was only worried about what the Mets were doing that day. I really didn't care much about the Watergate, and not too many other people did. But little did I know that within 13 years, the main attraction of the Watergate burglary, I would know Richard Nixon, I would know Larry O'Brien. That's a basketball gift he gave me from Christmas, and me and a lot of others. He was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. He was also the guy that was the target of the Watergate break-in. And I said to him one day, I said, Larry, why did they break in your office? He said, they thought I knew something. I didn't really know anything, but they thought I knew somebody. So I have Nixon and I have O'Brien. And here I am, 29 years old, and I'm interacting with the two chief people in the Watergate break-in. This is G. Gordon Liddy. Now, when you're a general counsel, are you supposed to break the law?
No.
No. Well, G. Gordon Liddy was Nixon's general counsel. In January 1972, G. Gordon Liddy, the general counsel to CREEP. Oh, that's a pair. That's a pair, CREEP and G. Gordon Liddy. The Committee for the Re-election of the President proposes, let's burglarize O'Brien's office, and while we're at it, let's wiretap it. This guy's the lawyer. He's an officer of the court, and he's suggesting, let's break the law. And they do. So we'll break into the Watergate complex headquarters in Washington, D.C., but these guys had some experience already. Remember Daniel Ellsberg?
Yeah.
Remember the plumbers broke into his psychiatrist's office in Los Angeles, and they were looking for dirt on Ellsberg? Same bunch of guys, and they're going to do the same to this guy, Larry O'Brien. On May 17, 1972, wiretaps are placed on the telephones of the Democratic National Committee Chairman Lawrence O'Brien and the Executive Director of the Democratic States Chairman R. Spencer Oliver, Jr. On June 17, 1972, Frank Wells, a security guard at the Watergate complex, called police at 1:30 in the morning, and there were 5 men arrested inside the Democratic National Committee's headquarters. 5 guys who nobody thought much about. But let me tell you something. I'm a journalist. That's what I did. I was on TV. I was a pundit on TV, on MSNBC and others. I did a lot of radio work over 45 years, and now I do a podcast. And I wrote for newspapers and I wrote for magazines. I was a street guy. I was never in the studio. I was a street guy. And this is kind of important because one of the people covering this break-in was a guy named Carl Bernstein. Remember him?
Yeah.
He was a street guy. He was a guy on the streets. He was a cop reporter. And the guys on the streets know what is going on. Guys in the studio, women in the studio, they got the air conditioner on, they got the makeup, they got the hair done. They don't do any work. We do the work on the streets. And this is important in this story. On June 18th, 1972, Virgilio Gonzalez, Bernard Barker, James W. McCourt Jr., who was friends with one of my first bosses, Steve North, Eugenio Martinez and Frank Sturgis are charged with attempted burglary and attempted interception of telephone and other communications. It's just about burglary at this point. Except it wasn't. And these 2 guys were assigned the story. They weren't big-time reporters. It was Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, and they worked perfectly together. Woodward was one of these, he was one of these guys who had to make sure every I was dotted carefully and every T was crossed. Bernstein, like me, we'll throw the bomb and ask questions later. That's the way I approached news stories, and that's the way he approached news stories.
Which one was which?
That's Bernstein and that's Woodward. Bernstein's the dark-haired, long-haired guy, and Woodward, who is the college guy, as opposed to Bernstein, who is the high school, I think he dropped out of high school, as a matter of fact, Bernstein. On June 19, 1972, the Washington reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward revealed that one of the Watergate burglars, James McCourt, was a Republican Party security aide, and there is McCourt. In June and July, a Woodward and Bernstein source called Deep Throat, who eventually was identified as Mark Felt, reveals that an examination of the burglar's account showed the link to the 1972 creep. Yes?
Why did they call him Deep Throat? Is that?
That was his nickname. That was, you know. well, you know, this is how they referred to him when he had to talk to the real heroes. The real heroes of the Watergate story. Yeah, Woodward and Bernstein did all the legwork, but the real heroes are Katharine Graham, who is the publisher of the Post, and Ben Bradley, the executive editor. They allowed these guys to do whatever they had to do, and they had one ally too. You might remember this guy, Herb Bloch. He did cartoons. Hated Nixon, went back to the 1950s. There's a book on Herb Bloch cartoons. There's a movie out there which I saw about 8 years ago, a documentary about him. Hated Nixon. And Herb Bloch kept going, and Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein keep going. Anyway, so they show this link between Creep and these guys. And they let the investigation in the newspaper continue. Now, the question today, would that happen today? The answer is probably no, because newspapers didn't have the resources, and they couldn't afford to have two guys just do nothing for weeks at a time. And they probably would say, well, this is no big deal, and then they'd get all the operatives on TV. Yeah, he did it. No, he didn't. Yeah, he did it. No, he didn't. This is real journalism as it was played out. There was also one other story, that real journalism as it played out during the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, and how Jim McKay was on, unfettered, giving you terrorism getting into that home for the first time with the Munich Olympics and the death of the killing of 11 Israelis. Anyway, presidential election 1972, Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon beats George McGovern. Well, it wasn't supposed to be McGovern who was running. At least the Nixon people didn't think it was going to be McGovern. They thought it was going to be Edmund Muskie, and that was their target. Oh, on the campaign, this guy had no personality. Absolutely devoid of personality. And yet he won 2 presidential elections. There he is on the campaign trail. On August 29th, 1972, Dick Nixon, and he's always going to be Dick Nixon to me. Dick Nixon at a news conference stated, I can say categorically that no one in the White House staff, no one in this administration presently employed was involved in this very bizarre incident. Well, only a face of mother could love. Dick Nixon. Please call me Dick. On August 30th, 1972, Nixon announces that the White House counsel, John Dean, another counsel, has completed an internal investigation into the Watergate break-in, and guess what? It wasn't us. We don't know who it is, but it's not us. We have no evidence of the White House involvement. It wasn't us. But these guys are continuing, and they're digging, and they're digging, and they're digging, and they're digging, and they're coming up with dirt. On September 29, 1972, the Washington Post reports that Nixon's former Attorney General, the #1 law enforcement person in the United States, John Mitchell, may be committing crimes. Anyway, he controlled a secret fund to finance intelligence gathering against the Democrats. When Bernstein calls Mitchell for a comment, Mitchell says, yeah, I'm going to take care of you and Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Post. The Post says, go ahead. They print it. They print it. So there is John Mitchell's problem. This is the guy that was the target. His name, Edmund Muskie. He was a senator from Maine. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey selected him as his running mate to run against Dick Nixon and Spiro Agnew, and George Wallace. And Curtis bombs away LeMay. Remember Curtis bombs away LeMay? He was Wallace's vice presidential choice. Anyway, October '72, Woodward and Bernstein report that the FBI had made connections between Nixon's aides and the Watergate break-in. Woodward and Bernstein described the existence of a major dirty tricks campaign conducted against Edmund Muskie, orchestrated by Donald Segretti, and others paid by Creep and another lawyer, Nixon's private attorney. And all these lawyers are supposed to make sure the laws are upheld. They don't. They're breaking them. On November 2nd, 1972, Nixon is elected to a second term in office, defeating the Democratic candidate George McGovern. Nixon won 49 of 50 states. He got 520 electoral votes. garnered nearly 61% of the popular vote, beating McGovern by nearly 18 million votes. But the storm clouds are brewing, and the White House knows 1973 is going to be a difficult year ahead.
Why
And
do
there
they
is-
know that?
They knew it because they knew what they were doing. And these guys, you know, Woodward and Bernstein keep digging up stuff, and the plumbers, they don't want to go to jail for Dick Nixon necessarily. They're going to go on trial. And here's Gonzalez, there's McCourt. On January 8th, 1973, the Watergate burglary trial begins. 5 defendants plead guilty. Liddy and McCourt are convicted after the trial. Here's another guy. This guy wants to be the head of the FBI. His name is L. Patrick Gray.
Oh,
Now, L. Patrick Gray, anybody who's the head of the FBI is supposed to be worried about crime, not committing it. He's committing it, L. Patrick Gray. On February 28, 1973, the acting FBI director, L. Patrick Gray, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee during his nomination to replace J. Edgar Hoover as the director of the FBI. Armed with newspaper articles indicating that the White House, why does the White House have possession of the FBI Watergate file? That's illegal. And this guy wants to run the FBI. The committee chairman, the Democrat Sam Ervin, questioned Gray as to what he knew about the White House obtaining the files. There's Ervin. And he says, hey, you know, we shared it, you know, I shared it with John Dean. You know, what are you going to do about it? Well, we're not going to make you the FBI director. Gray stated that he had given FBI reports to John Dean and discussed the FBI investigation with Dean on many occasions. It came out that Gray had destroyed important evidence entrusted to him by Dean. He destroyed, yes.
What was the role of John Dean?
John Dean was Nixon's special counsel to the White House. He gets deep, right? This is only the tip of the iceberg. This is-
I was watching it at the time, but I
Yeah.
thought it was amazing. Dean seemed to have like a photographic memory.
Yeah, he still does.
He remembers all the details.
Yeah, he still does. He's about 84, 85 years old. He's on CNN now. Anyway, it also came out Gray destroyed important evidence. He wants to be the FBI director and he's destroying evidence. Entrusted to him by Dean. Gray's nomination failed and Dean was directly linked to the Watergate cover-up. Here's James McCourt. He's very upset. On March 19, 1973, in a letter to Judge John J. Sirica, James McCourt says the defendants had been pressured to plead guilty and remained silent, that perjury was committed and that others were involved. McCourt stated his plea and testimony were compelled by pressure from the White House counsel, John Dean, and the former Attorney General, the #1 law enforcer in the United States, John N. Mitchell. G. Gordon Liddy, he's the guy who says, let's break in, and he gets sentenced. On March 23rd, 1973, the 5 Watergate burglars, along with G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, were sentenced with stiff fines and maximum prison time of up to 40 years. Liddy never served that. In fact, he became a star in radio, talk radio, yes.
I once read about Liddy.
Yeah.
Liddy was sort of a crazy guy.
Yeah, he was.
He put his hands
on fire.
And
Yeah, and claimed it didn't burn him.
able to take it.
Yeah,
Evan, what did Lee say? What did Leopold say?
he said that Liddy was a strange guy. He put his hand on the fire once, which he did, and he didn't feel it, supposedly. So anyway, Richard Nixon invites John Dean, or Dick Nixon. He wants to get close to John Dean, and he says, John, why don't we go up to Camp David? You know, we'll go up there. You know, it's named after my son-in-law, David. We could go up there and we could bond together. We could watch college basketball together in t-shirts and shorts, and we could scratch. You know, we could scratch and we could drink. You know, nobody's going to do anything about it. Well, he had more than that on his mind. On March 22nd, 1973, Dick Nixon requested that John Dean put together a report with everything he knew about the Watergate matter and invited him up to Camp David, which was named after his son-in-law, David Eisenhower, by Dwight Eisenhower. Dean went to Camp David, perform some work on the report, but then he realized, holy, that's me? I'm going to implicate me. If I do this report, it's me. I did all these things. He's a lawyer who broke the law. What am I doing here? So he's got to talk about his involvement and others. And he concluded he's being set up. He's going to be the scapegoat. He's the one who's going to take the fall. He's not going to take the fall. Doesn't complete the report. He starts thinking. There's John Dean back then. Starts thinking, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? What do I do? How do I get out of it? April 6th, Dean hires an attorney and begins cooperating with the Senate Watergate investigators while continuing his work as Nixon's chief White House counsel. He's working both sides of the street and participating in cover-up efforts, not disclosing to Dick Nixon this until some time later. Dean continued to provide information to the prosecutors, who were able to make enormous progress on the cover-up, which until then they had virtually ignored, having concentrated on the burglary and the events preceding it. And all of Nixon's men, all the president's men begin to fall. Haldeman was not a lawyer. He was an advertising guy. Ehrlichman was a lawyer. All these guys should have known better. Nixon, third in his law class in Duke. John Dean, L. Patrick Gray, Gordon Liddy, Ehrlichman, all the president's men. Most of them lawyers should have known better, who didn't or didn't want to. Dean had asked Dick Nixon for formal immunity from prosecution for any crimes he might have committed while serving as the White House counsel. I don't think so, John. You're on your own. I don't think so. Nixon refused to grant the request, and his refusal led Dean to cooperate with the prosecutors very soon afterwards. There is Dean in his final days at the White House. Dean served notice on April 19th that I'm not going to be the scapegoat for Dick Nixon, and the word was passed by associates of Dean that he was ready to implicate Ehrlichman and Haldeman in the case. I'll take the responsibility. I'll do it. On April 30th, 1973, the White House announces the resignation of the Attorney General, Richard Kleindienst, and the presidential aides, John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman, and the firing of John Dean. Of course, the Attorney General's a lawyer, too. Nixon, after accepting the resignation of 3 of his closest aides and firing Dean, said, "It's my fault. It's my fault. It's not their fault. It's my fault." Of course, he didn't mean it. He knew full well that he was involved, but he wouldn't take responsibility, even though he did. I solemnly swear, John Dean. On June 25th, 1973, Dean began his testimony before the Senate Watergate Committee. The committee had voted him to grant him use immunity. In testimony, he further implicated officials, including Nixon, fundraiser, and former Attorney General John Mitchell, Nixon, and himself. Tools of the trade. I had a lot of those as a radio reporter. The tools of the trade. This one had the counter, this one had the forward and push play and the record button and all that. Simple tape recorder. And that would do Dick Nixon in a simple tape recorder. February 1971, a sound-activated taping machine was installed in the Oval Office, including in Nixon's Oval Office desk, the replica that I sat behind, to capture audio transmitted by telephone taps and concealed microphones. The system was expanded into other rooms within the White House and Camp David. The taping system was confirmed by Senate Committee staff member Donald Sanders on July 13, 1973, in an interview with White House aide Alexander Butterfield, who's one of the few people still living from this era. And there is Alexander Butterfield, who I said is still around. 3 days later, it was made public during the televised testimony of Butterfield when he was asked about the possibility of a White House taping system by the Senate counsel, Fred Thompson, who's also an actor. as well. It was on TV shows. That's it. It's a tape recorder, reel to reel. Well, it was before cassettes. Reel to reel. So hit your numbers there, you know, and mark it down. See where the thing that you want is on the tape. This is probably 15 minutes worth of tape, and that's about it. That's the original Nixon tape recorder. On July 26, 1973, the committee subpoenaed several White House tapes after the president refused to surrender them. The accuracy of Dean's testimony was confirmed by the tapes. Photographic memory. See? Well, they have to have a special counsel brought in, and they do. This guy, Archibald Cox. He's a Harvard law professor and former Solicitor General, and he's asked to be the special prosecutor to investigate the Watergate break-in. Cox clashed with the White House over Nixon's refusal to release 10 hours of secret Oval Office tapes, some of which implicated the president in the break-ins. Now let me say this about that to make this perfectly clear. On October 23rd, that becomes known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Nixon fired the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, and these guys in the Justice Department said, we ain't touching this, we're out of here, we're gone. We don't want to do what you want to do. Elliot Richardson, the Attorney General, I'm gone. William Ruckelhaus, Deputy Attorney General, I'm gone. Want no part of this, I'm out of here. I can make more money as a white shoe lawyer in Washington. There's Richardson and Ruckelhaus, and he got a smile out of Nixon. Look at that smile out of Dick Nixon. Anyway, Ruckelhaus in happier days, I guess. On the night of Saturday, October 20th, 1973, Nixon ordered Cox's firing. The person with the authority to fire Cox was the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson. I'm out of here. Do what you want. I quit. His deputy, Ruckelhaus, becomes the acting Attorney General, and he says, I'm out the door with Elliot. Good luck. I'm gone. That left Robert Bork, the Solicitor General, as the highest ranking official in the Justice Department. He carried out Nixon's order and probably cost himself a Supreme Court justice slot years later, although he became a beloved cartoon character in The Simpsons. The reaction to the firing and resignations would force Nixon to appoint another special prosecutor to replace Cox. Congress would become more interested in what happened at the Watergate complex June 1972. So here's Cox, and that is Leon Jaworski, who took Cox's place. On November 5th, 1973, Nixon appoints a new special prosecutor, Jaworski, and he would secure unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decision that forced Dick Nixon to release his secretly recorded tapes from the Oval Office in July 1974. The end is near. The end is near. You read Henry Kissinger's account, Nixon was drinking heavily, talking to pictures on the wall, like Abe Lincoln's portrait. Oh, what do you think, Abe? According to Henry Kissinger, the beginning of the end. May 9th, the U.S. House of Representatives, this is 1974, Judiciary Committee starts impeachment proceedings against Nixon. The walls are caving in, and the paintings are talking back to him, according to Henry Kissinger. On July 24th, in a unanimous ruling, the Supreme Court orders Nixon to release the tape recordings. The decision came 2 months after the White House gave the House Judiciary Committee edited transcripts of Nixon's conversations, but they did not turn over the actual tapes. But that is coming. This is Peter Rodino. He was a congressman from New Jersey, and he's the chairman of the impeachment committee. July 27th through the 30th, the impeachment process starts. The House Judiciary Committee. This is
1973.
74. The House. This is only 50 years and 2 weeks ago. The Judiciary Committee passes 3 articles of impeachment against Nixon for obstruction of justice, misuse of power, and contempt of Congress. The committee sent the full impeachment to the floor for a full House vote. which never happened because of the elders. These are the Republican elders. In the middle there is Barry Goldwater. He's one of the 3 Republicans that meets with Nixon on August 7th. And they lay out the cards. The GOP elders, they're at the White House. This is August 7th, 50 years and 2 days ago. Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, the U.S. Minority Leader John Rhodes of Arizona, and the Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania. They're not there to demand Nixon resign, but they're there laying out what might happen up at Capitol Hill. They tell Nixon, you ain't got no friends no more. Your friends are all gone. There's nobody there that's going to support you. You are almost certain to be impeached. You are almost certain to be convicted and almost certain to be removed from office because of Watergate. Goldwater and Nixon in happier days. Nixon looks like a baby there, doesn't he? Back then. Goldwater, Rhodes, and Scott did not try to persuade or urge Nixon to resign in the meeting in his working office at the old executive office building, but they told Nixon, you don't have any friends on Capitol Hill. It's August 8th, and the end is near. Nixon puts on some makeup, sits behind a resolute desk. They have a little backdrop behind him and says, say goodnight, Dick. Good night, Dick. Nixon decided to resign. He gives a nationally televised address from the Oval Office on August 8th. How many of you watched Rowan and Martin's Laughing? Of which he was on once. Sock it to me. The end of Rowan and Martin's Laughing, which was an ode to Burns and Allen, Dan Rowan would say to Dick Martin, say goodnight, Dick. The cast that night would say goodnight, Dick, and the final word spoken on the show was, say goodnight, Dick. Time to say goodnight, Dick. Well, I never did get to say goodnight to Dick. Oh well. This is what he said. I've never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interest of America first. America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly in this time with the problems we face at home and abroad. Well, Nixon, even though he was, I don't know, was he a crook here or just a criminal? Because remember, I'm not a crook. He's a criminal. He's a criminal by this time. Anyway, he had some honor. He left. He resigned. He put America before him, although he lived pretty well in exile. And there's the Watergate. It's me in 1982 in front of the Watergate Hotel.
I read
Yeah.
that, in a sense, the whole thing was, from his point of view,
Yeah.
it was unnecessary because he won by a landslide.
Well, he won by a landslide.
And he was, I don't know, very...
He's paranoid.
Paranoid.
Extremely paranoid.
Also a big warrior.
Yeah.
When it wasn't necessary.
Yeah, well, he was
ironical.
always at war with himself. So he's very paranoid. But they were paranoid about Muskie in 1972. Anyway, Nixon goes on. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. Gerald Ford would become the first president of the United States who is never elected as president or vice president. He replaced another disgraced politician, Vice President Spiro Agnew, who resigned in 1973 because of Agnew's corruption and kickbacks he had been taken from Leonard Moss over in Maryland while he was the governor and executive of Baltimore County. Goodbye, goodbye. And he goes off to San Clemente, never to be heard from again. You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore. Think of how much fun you'll be missing.
I thought he said that already before.
1962, he said that.
In
1962,
California.
in California, at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
What was his relationship with Kissinger?
Kissinger, their working relationship, that's about it. But think of all the fun I had watching Dick Nixon signing autographs years later. Anyway, Hello to the accidental president. On September 8th, President Gerald Ford pardons former President Dick Nixon. Ford later defended this action before the House Judiciary Committee, explaining that he wanted to end the national divisions created by the Watergate scandal. What he did was create deeper divisions that have been playing out for the last 50 years. There were no other pardons. Watergate resulted in 69 government officials being charged, a good many of them lawyers, and 48 being found guilty. Ford was criticized for giving Nixon a full pardon, but the world went on. John Dean, remember John Dean? Well, back in 1973, he pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice before the Watergate trial judge, John Sirica, who was a Republican, on October 19th. He would do 4 months in jail. Meanwhile, Nixon said there were a lot of problems going on around the world. Here's one of them. But this one isn't as big a problem as it seems. It was the Carnation Revolution. There are carnations in the barrels of these rifles, and it was in Portugal. On April 25th, 200 military officers decided to take action and overthrow Salazar, the dictator. The officials initially called themselves the Captains Movement, which they later renamed the Armed Forces Movement to portray the image of broader support throughout the military. Their plan to topple the dictatorship, which had been there since about 1933, fully resolve civil or restore civil liberties, hold elections for an assembly, constitutional assembly, to write a new constitution, abolish the political police, find a diplomatic solution to the colonial wars, particularly in Angola, which would become a proxy war between Soviet Union and the United States later in the decade, and turn over power to democratically elected leaders. And this is the Carnation Revolution. Nobody was killed. Salazar's 40-year dictatorship had collapsed. The coup was peaceful. There were no executions. Meanwhile, Willy Brandt is gone in West Germany, which actually turned out to be a good thing for the United States in 1976. I'll tell you why in a minute. Helmut Schmidt replaces him. Remember when Gerald Ford said to New York City, drop dead? Remember that? New York City was bankrupt, and Ford literally said to New York City, drop dead. Well, this guy read the Riot Act to Gerald Ford and also to Dick Cheney and to Alan Greenspan, who were part of the Ford administration. And he said, you know what, you idiots? You let New York City go bankrupt, you're going to have a worldwide depression and it's on your head. All of a sudden, Ford listened because of this guy, Helmut Schmidt. Do you know that? Helmut Schmidt's the hero of saving New York City. On May 6th, Willy Brandt, the West Germany chancellor, resigns. He's replaced by Schmidt. On April 24th, there was a report of an East German spy working in Brandt's West Germany government, and that would lead to his downfall. Haile Selassie is kicked out in Ethiopia. On September 12th, the Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia is deposed by the Deng, or the Provisional Military Government of Socialist Ethiopia. The new government was a communist Marxist-Leninist military junta, and they end the Solomonic dynasty's rule. It started in 1270. 704 years, same family ruling. The Ethiopian Civil War begins. Any of you in this gas line? Any of you? See, I lived on the Rockland County, Bergen County border up in New York and in New Jersey.
What was that?
I'm going to tell you in a minute. And so I would sneak in like at 5 to 12 with my odd license plate. I was already online. So I got gas at 5 to 12. The lines, I was only 17 years old at the time, 18 years old. What else am I supposed to do at midnight?
They want to jack up the price.
Well, I'll tell you that in a second. Hang on. I'll tell you that in a second. Anyway, OPEC started an oil embargo in 1973 with the outbreak of the Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War. You were there, weren't you? In 1973?
My wife happened to be there.
She was, where were you? Why were you?
I can't know, I was in Israel, but I had to go back and teach. I I came back just before it happened.
Oh,
Just
okay.
before it happened.
You abandoned your wife?
What?
You abandoned your wife in the
No,
war?
I did not abandon. I had to go back to teach.
Oh, okay.
And she.
Where'd you
she got
teach?
stuck. Yeshiva University.
Over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so this is what happened. The Arab oil producers cut off exports to the United States, which brought soaring gas prices. It went from like 33 cents a gallon to 67 cents a gallon, and long lines at the filling stations. It contributed to a major economic downturn in the United States. The hope of a negotiated end to hostilities between Israel and Syria was enough to lift the oil embargo in March, but there would be subsequent oil embargoes. In Greece, the military junta is gone. July 23rd, after 7 years, the Greek military rule exits and democracy returns. The military government in Greece collapsed in the form of Prime Minister Konstantin Karmelinis has been invited back to return. Now tell me how many of you had this guilty pleasure of watching Patty Hearst and being kidnapped and all the TV news reports, the sensationalism. Where's Patty today? How many of you had a guilty pleasure watching that? I didn't. I didn't care. I really didn't care. But there were a lot of people who did care about Patty Hearst or Tanya, and there she is on surveillance tape. The granddaughter of a really bad guy, really bad guy, William Randolph Hearst. Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army led by Sinclair in February. She would spend 19 months with her captors and join them in criminal acts shortly after her kidnapping. She was kept in a closet, became a member of the SLA, changed her name to Tanya, adopted radical rhetoric, robbed a bank, and went on the lam. She was captured by the FBI in September 1975. I remember one report, because I was going into journalism, I remember one report. Is Patty okay? Is Patty okay? This is one sensational. Well, let me talk a little bit about my business news. There was a guy named Al Primo who was going around to TV stations saying, you gotta change your news format. It's too serious. It's way too serious. You have to lighten up. You have to laugh and all that, and you'll get more advertising. And that happened. And there were people, is she alive or is she dead? Is she alive or is she dead? And I'm like, this is not journalism. This is entertainment, which has led to today something called infotainment. But anyway, that was Patty Hearst. Hey, baseball fans here. No baseball fans? One. What team?
I'm not anymore, but at that time, that was quite a thing.
Yeah, so anyway, Hank Aaron breaks Babe Ruth's home run record. It's April 8th, 1974, and Hank Aaron, the baseball player, hits his 715th career home run, breaking Babe Ruth's 39-year-old major league record. He succeeded even though he was getting hate mail and death threats from people outraged that a black man could supplant a white baseball icon. He kept every one of those death threat letters to the end of his life to remind him about America. That's my father-in-law. He's with George Foreman. How many of you have a George Foreman grill? Do you like it? Yeah. Well, my father-in-law used to accompany me to places like the 21 Club and Gallagher's and all that when I went to news conferences in the 1980s. And I was kind of embarrassed that he was taking pictures with guys like Foreman, but you know what? It makes sense to me all these years later because I could show you my involvement there with George Foreman. I had interviewed him that day. On October 30th, the Rumble in the Jungle takes place in Kinshasa, Zaire. Muhammad Ali knocks out George Foreman in 8 rounds to regain the heavyweight title, which had been stripped from him in April 1967 without due process. He refused induction into the United States Armed Forces. And that's me, and that's Ali in 1985. Yeah, that's me, and that's Muhammad Ali. Only one of us is still here, that's me. But no, that's me and Muhammad Ali. And somebody said, why don't you take a picture with him? I wasn't planning to, but somebody had a camera and said, take a picture with him, we'll send you the picture. I took a picture with him. So I'm glad today I took a picture with Muhammad Ali. Anybody, he was quite frequently at anti-war marches back then. And I know He was at anti-war marches, and I know one woman said the highlight of her anti-war march was Muhammad Ali was standing 6 feet from her, marching with her. Who? This guy?
No, you.
Yeah, that's me.
But I don't know where.
Here. That's me 40 years ago.
But I don't know where I saw you. Be somewhere else.
Probably on TV. Probably on TV.
I met him one time.
Yeah.
It wasn't
And I called him
TV.
by his real name.
Cassius Clay,
Right, and he
Yeah.
says, no, my name is
Muhammad Ali. But he never legally changed his name. Ali used a rope-a-dope style against Foreman. The rope-a-dope was essentially a bait and switch. Ali would feign weakness, allowing his opponents to attack him, ultimately punch themselves out. When they had nothing left to give, Ali would spring back to the attack and leave the worn-out opponents flat on their back. The barcode. I'm not going to talk about chewing gum. Enriched my periodontist. He might have been able to buy a yacht from all the money I spent on him back in the day. I don't know how many of you had periodontists and oral surgeons and all, but they have money generally. Thanks to people like Phil Wrigley who put out gum. On June 26th, the supermarket cashier scans a multi-pack of juicy fruit gum across a barcode in Troy, Ohio. It's the first product ever to be checked out by the Universal Product Code. So anybody here ever solve a Rubik's Cube?
Yes.
I know the game.
You know the game. Did anybody ever solve it though?
Yes,
You did?
yes.
No.
How'd you solve it?
I don't know, I just did it.
You're the first person I ever met who solved a Rubik's Cube. You know how I solved a Rubik's Cube? Pulled it all apart, put it back together. And I broke the game, yes.
There's a mathematical problem that goes with this. How many different positions you can get?
Yeah,
I forget the number.
yeah. The Rubik's Cube, or the Magic Cube, is a 3D combination puzzle invented by the Hungarian sculptor and professor of architecture, Erno Rubek. It would be years before it was sold worldwide. It was available in the U.S. beginning in 1980. John Lennon appeared with his it wasn't really a concert, it was 3 songs, but Lennon appears on stage with Elton John, Thanksgiving Eve, Madison Square Garden. It's November 28th. In his final public appearance, he joins Elton John on stage. Among the songs he sung was written by an old, estranged fiance of mine by the name of Paul McCartney. I saw her standing there. She was just 17, you know what I mean. That girl today is 80 years old. I get to talk about Princess Grace's brother, Jack Kelly. Remember Princess Grace, Grace Kelly? See, this is the only reason I throw it in there, because I knew Jack Kelly. Now, I got a question for you. All the time I knew Jack Kelly back in the 1980s, I never once asked him about his sister, Princess Grace. Now, should I have asked him, how's your sister doing? Wouldn't that be proper?
You didn't even know about her.
I knew about her. I figured he didn't want to talk about her. So anyway, this is where I get to talk about Jack Kelly. He was out of Philadelphia, rich guy out of Philadelphia. In the first few weeks of the World Football League, it looked to be a success, but in Jacksonville, the Sharks ownership admitted that 44,000 tickets were giveaways. The Philadelphia Bell ownership, led by Princess Grace's brother, Jack Kelly, told the press that 100,000 tickets had been sold for almost next to nothing. 6 games into the first season, WFL franchises were in serious trouble. The Detroit Wheels had 33 owners, including Marvin Gaye. Remember Marvin Gaye? Yeah. He was one of the owners. That franchise was looking to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, the Orlando-based Florida Blazers to Atlanta. The IRS allowed the Birmingham Americans team, whose owners owed the federal government as much as $237,000 in back taxes, which would be about $5 million, to play in the WFL championship game against the Florida Blazers at Birmingham's Legion Field, hoping to get a part of the gate. And there were the people who went to that game. After the game, sheriff's deputies seized Blazers equipment. The Americans and Blazers players had not been paid in weeks to play the game. There was a player on the Florida team in Orlando that they asked him, "What are you doing without getting paid?" He says, "It's so bad I can't even buy toilet paper." And all of a sudden, all this toilet paper arrived in the locker room. not too long after, remember Johnny Carson went on and said there was a toilet paper shortage in 1973? You remember that? Yeah, Carson went on and there was a run on toilet papers. On toilet paper, Walter Cronkite had to go on saying there is no toilet paper shortage. The most trusted man in America said, there's no toilet paper shortage. Don't go out and buy it. By the way, Howard Cosell, who I knew, once said, when they write the history of TV, they're going to write about the 3 C's. Cronkite, Carson, and Cosell, not necessarily in that order. Carson started the toilet paper run. Cronkite ended it. In 1974, Howard Cosell was voted by some survey as the most liked and most hated guy in America. Howard Cosell. They were convinced to stay on the field. There was some promise of playoff money and championship rings. Say goodbye to Lucy. Lucy ends her weekly show. She decided to give up weekly television. She had been on and off for 23 years. The show, I Love Lucy, ended in 57. Here's Lucy came back in 62. So she was on for about 18 to 23 years. She decided that's it with the Here's Lucy show. She is the mother of Star Trek. Did you know that? Any Star Trek fans here? Anybody who watches Star Trek?
I love Lucy.
Anybody who knows what Star Trek is?
Yes.
Anyway, without her, here's no Star Trek. She was the artistic head of Desilu. She owned the studio, first for a woman. She was one of the most powerful women in the world in business in the 1960s. You know that? By the way, her birthday was the other day, August 6th. She would have been 113 years old. Can you imagine Lucy? She was born 113 years ago. How many of you still watch the show? Anyway, she greenlighted Star Trek against everybody's wishes, including her board of directors. It's gone bankrupt the studio. Who was right, Lucy or the board of directors? How much is that show worth now? Billions of dollars?
20 million.
What?
20 million.
No, that's for just this show, I Love Lucy. I Love Lucy is still making Paramount money decades after its final original show, which was May 6, 1957. For doing nothing, the show brings in $20 million a year. And if you have Pluto TV, or download Pluto TV, you can watch all 180 of those shows whenever you want, because it's there. Lucy would return to TV in September of 1986, a show on ABC called Life with Lucy. It was so bad, there were 13 shows that were supposed to be on, only 8 of them ever made it to the air. The other 5 sat in a vault and they were eventually released. That's the. How many of you have gone out and bought something at Sears in your life?
What?
Sears Roebuck. Sears. Sears was the original Amazon. You know, Sears did not have a store until 1925. It would be 1925 before they opened their first store. 1925, 99 years ago. It was Amazon before Amazon, the mail order catalog. You sent your thing in and you got it back. Amazon's the same thing, isn't it? Absolutely the same thing. Anyway, this was taken from Lake Michigan, as I was on Lake Michigan, and that was the Sears Tower. It's called the Willis Tower now. Sears Tower in Chicago became the world's tallest building in 1974, 108 stories, 1,451-foot skyscraper. The tower has 108 stories. It's counted by standard methods. The building owner said the main roof is 109, the mechanical penthouse is 110.
I thought the tallest building is Malaysia.
1974 we're talking about. This was 74. At its completion, it surpassed the World Trade Center in New York to become the tallest building in the world. Any Stephen King fans here? Nobody reads horror genre? Okay. 26-year-old Stephen King is an author. He publishes his first novel, Carrie, during April. Actually, it was his 4th, but the first one published. The story focused on a bullied and sheltered teenage girl who discovers she has telekinetic powers, ultimately using her powers to seek revenge. The novel is credited with revitalizing the horror genre. She could tell the future. She could tell things going on. So let's take a look back at 50 years ago with Gerald Ford. Nixon went into exile, politically. And I was there when he really returned. I mean, he did the David Frost thing, he did other things, but he really comes back into the spotlight because of me. I guess not me. But I was there talking to him when he becomes an elder statesman because he was mediating the labor dispute between the baseball umpires and the owners. He gave the owners a 40% pay raise.
I saw the movie of David Frost.
David Frost.
And my opinion was that Nixon made Frost look like a schoolboy.
Nixon could do that to anybody. Nixon was very smart. He was very smart, but he was extremely paranoid. I'll give you want a Nixon story? I'll give you a Nixon story. The New York Yankees had a minority owner, owned 1% of the team by the name of Barry Helper. And Barry Helper's big claim to fame, besides being very rich, was he had the biggest baseball memorabilia collection, bigger than Cooperstown. So one day he's there, and I see him, and Nixon's there. And he goes up to Nixon, and he's got a baseball in his hand. And he said, "Oh, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President, can I get you to sign an autograph?" "Oh, of course, of course." And so he hands it to him. And he said, "Oh, by the way, I always get people signing my baseballs using their nicknames." He said, "Oh?" And Nixon's looking at him. He says, "Can you sign it with your nickname?" "Oh, you mean Tricky Dick?" "Yeah." "No. Be grateful for what you're getting." I told that story during the pandemic. I was doing a talk in Boca Raton JCC. And unbeknownst to me, Barry Helper's sister was part of the Zoom crowd. And she said, "I never heard that story." She said, "Thank you," because Barry had died. "Thank you for reminding me about my brother." Anyway, Ford pardoned Nixon. Ford lost the presidential election in '76 to Jimmy Carter. It was his first presidential campaign. Hank Aaron hit 755 home runs. That record was eclipsed by Barry Bonds, who hit 762, but Bonds was accused, but never proven, of using steroids. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in business. But you know what? She didn't want to be remembered as that. She wanted to be remembered, her legacy as an actress, although she opened plenty of doors for women in terms of business, but she didn't want people to know. In late 1989, the Berlin Wall started to come down in talks between East and West Germany. Officials, joined by officials from the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, began to explore the possibility of reunification. It took 45 years to accomplish. 2 months following the reunification, October 3rd, 1990, all German elections took place, and Helmut Kohl became the first chancellor of the reunited Germany. World Football League folded in 1975. September 18, 1975, Patty Hearst was captured by the FBI. She was tried and convicted in March 1976 for bank robbery, felonious use of firearms. She was sentenced to 7 years in jail. She was released February 1979 after Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. George Foreman and the Foreman Grill. How many of you had the Foreman Grill? You liked it?
Yeah, I liked it.
You liked it? Anybody else have the Foreman Grill? What'd you think?
I liked it.
I still have one in my basement. It hasn't been used in about 20 years. But anyway, both Ali and Foreman became beloved boxing figures. Ali for his stance against the Vietnam War and the shenanigans in and out of the ring. Foreman became a lovable old man fighting in commercial pitchmen. John Lennon never performed live in the arena again or stadium and was gunned down December 8, 1980 over at the Dakotas. The Dervish fell in 1991 in Ethiopia. The headquarters of the African Union is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ethiopia can make the claim of being the diplomatic capital of Africa. The Ethiopian government has played an active role in attempting to resolve conflicts in neighboring Somalia and South Sudan. That is Portugal. Portugal's first free election was held on April 25th, 1975, to write a new constitution replacing the Constitution of 1933. Another election was held in 1976. The first constitutional government was led by the center-left socialist Mario Soares. He took office. Woodward and Bernstein are still around today. Bernstein is still talking about Donald Trump. Woodward is writing books about Donald Trump. These guys have been at it for more than a half century, and they're still out there. Bernstein is still on CNN, and Woodward's still around. Mark Felt was Deep Throat. He was identified in 2005. They called him Deep Throat. He was the source. He was a former FBI associate director, but never got to be the FBI director, so he got his revenge, didn't he? He brought down Richard Nixon. His stuff brought down Richard Nixon. That's Robert Bork. No, actually, that's a caricature of Robert Bork in The Simpsons. Anybody watch The Simpsons here? Or have watched The Simpsons? On October 23rd, 1987, the United States Senate rejected Robert Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court by a roll call of 58-42 because of his role in Watergate, firing Archibald Cox. On the TV show, The Simpsons, Judge Roy Snyder's character is based on Robert Bork. Stephen King has sold more than 350 million books. It's a lot of books to sell. Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, when I was up there. Sears, store closing. They had a lot of those store closing signs. Sears Tower serves as the headquarters of the retail company Sears from 1974 to 1994. Sears sold the tower in 1994, vacated it in 1995, retained the naming rights through 2003. It is now known as the Willis Tower. Sears was once the largest retailer in the United States, but it barely exists today. As of May 2023, there are still 11 stores operating. That's it. Sears is down to 11 stores, and pretty soon they'll be gone. Any questions, any comments? It's your turn to talk. I've talked out. So, yeah. Anybody have